Today, we've got a story that proves sometimes one night can change a lifetime. Imagine a lone cowboy living in the harsh mountains, and then an Apache woman shows up at his doorstep during a raging snowstorm. He tells her she can stay just one night. What happens next is nothing short of unforgettable. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Comment below what you would do if you were in his shoes. Let's get started. The wind howled across the empty stretch of high desert as the lone cabin stood firm against the rising dusk. Inside, Jacob Turner set another log on the fire, his shoulders heavy with the familiar weight of solitude. 11 years alone made silence feel like an old companion, steady and predictable. But on that night, as the storm thickened, he heard something he wasn't expecting, 3 soft knocks at the door. At first, he thought the wind was playing tricks on him. But when the knocking came again, fainter yet urgent, Jacob reached for his lantern and stepped toward the door. When he opened it, the cold rushed in like a living thing, biting and sharp. But what struck him wasn't the storm, it was the woman standing on his porch. Soaked, shivering, exhausted, her long dark hair hung in wet strands across her face. She was Apache, her traditional dress torn at the hem, her breath trembling in the icy air. For a second, Jacob thought she might collapse right there, but she steadied herself enough to whisper one fragile sentence. Just one night, I only need one night. Jacob had spent over a decade trying to keep distance between himself and the world, but something in her voice, fear, desperation, maybe both, cut through him. He stepped aside without another word. She moved inside slowly, cautiously, as if unsure whether she was walking into safety or another danger. Her eyes scanned the room like someone used to surviving alone, used to expecting the worst. Jacob handed her a blanket and tended the fire, trying not to stare, yet unable to ignore the deep exhaustion carved into her face. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. She warmed her hands by the fire, her breath finally slowing, but Jacob could see she was holding herself together with sheer will. He poured her a cup of warm water and placed it gently beside her. She hesitated, studying him like a cornered animal trying to decide if the hand reaching out was meant to help or harm. When she finally lifted the cup, her hands trembled. Jacob pretended not to notice. He'd learned long ago that dignity mattered more than comfort. After a while, when the storm beat harder against the walls, Jacob asked quietly, "You traveled far?" She didn't look up, only nodded. "Too far." Her voice was soft, but there was a strength beneath it, a resilience born from surviving more winters and storms than she cared to count. Jacob didn't pry. He knew what it was like to carry stories too heavy to share with strangers. But every now and then, her eyes flicked toward the window, as if she feared someone or something might have followed her. As the night deepened and the fire settled into a steady glow, Jacob found himself watching her with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. Something didn't add up. Her dress wasn't only torn, it was scorched at the edge, as if she'd escaped fire. There were scratches along her arms, half hidden under the blanket, and beneath the calm expression she tried to hold, there was grief, raw, deep, unspoken. But Jacob knew better than to ask too soon. People who ran from something didn't talk until they believed they were safe. And safety was something she clearly hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't until she finally leaned back against the chair, exhaustion winning the battle against fear, that Jacob saw how close she was to collapsing. He grabbed another blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up, surprised by the unexpected gentleness. "You can rest," he said softly. "The storm won't let anyone track you tonight." Her eyes widened, caught between relief and alarm. She hadn't told him she was being followed. She hadn't said a word about running. But he'd seen enough signs, read enough expressions, to understand the truth. The fire crackled as the silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken realities. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Jacob wondered when she had last slept somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Outside, the storm raged like an angry beast, but inside the cabin, a strange calm settled. He didn't know her name, she didn't know his. Yet something about her presence felt like a shift in the universe, as though the life he had built in quiet isolation was about to tilt in a direction he had never expected. An hour passed before her voice broke the quiet. Why did you let me in?" Jacob paused, surprised by the question. "Because everyone deserves a place to stop running," he said simply. She studied him with eyes that had seen too much, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. After a long moment, she nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as though accepting his answer, not fully trusting it yet, but no longer rejecting it either. She wrapped the blanket tighter, her breathing steadier now, her body slowly releasing the tension it had clung to for survival. As the night crept toward its darkest hour, Jacob stepped outside to secure the barn door rattling in the wind. The cold slapped him instantly, reminding him of just how harsh the world outside could be. When he returned, he paused at the doorway. She had fallen asleep in the chair, head tilted slightly, the fire painting a soft glow across her face. For the first time, he noticed the faint traces of tears dried on her cheeks. Jacob stood there longer than he meant to, a strange feeling settling over him, protective, unfamiliar, and deeper than simple concern. He didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something that neither of them would ever forget. Morning came slow and pale, the storm reduced to icy drizzle. Jacob awoke to find her still asleep, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and the faint smell of wet pine lingering in the cabin. He brewed coffee and sat quietly, letting the warmth fill the room while he watched her chest rise and fall with steady breaths. There was a softness in her vulnerability that unsettled him. He hadn't realized how empty his years had been, how he had survived without warmth beyond the fire, without trust beyond the walls he built around himself. When she finally stirred, she rubbed her eyes and gave a small, cautious smile. "Morning," she whispered. Her voice had a musical quality despite its weariness. Jacob offered her a cup of coffee. She accepted, hands trembling slightly. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't tension, it was recognition, a shared acknowledgement that both had survived the night. The cabin, which had felt constrictive and lonely, now held the strange pulse of life that only comes when two paths converge unexpectedly. Days turned into a week. Jacob had agreed to let her stay one night, yet one night became many. Taya, as she had introduced herself, proved herself useful without a word of complaint. She tended the fire, cooked simple meals, and repaired small tools and fabrics around the cabin. She moved with a quiet efficiency that reminded Jacob of the Apache warriors he had heard about in stories, resilient, resourceful, untamed. Yet behind her calm demeanor, he sensed unhealed scars, experiences that had hardened her in ways he couldn't imagine, and he respected that distance. Their communication grew, piece by piece, through gestures, broken English, and long silences that spoke louder than words. Taya told him little of her past at first. She spoke of rivers, mountains, and places far away, yet avoided recounting the violence or loss she had endured. Jacob never pressed. He had learned that the heart can only open when it's ready. Instead, he shared stories of the ranch, of seasons and storms, of a life shaped by isolation. Their exchanges were slow but genuine, and Jacob noticed something he hadn't felt in over a decade, hope stirring faintly, like embers beneath a bed of ashes. One evening, a full moon reflected across the snow-laden fields, and Taya spoke of her family. "They are gone," she said quietly, staring into the fire. "Taken by sickness, by raids, by winter." Jacob's heart clenched, recognizing the weight of her grief. He said nothing, only handed her a cup of coffee. Silence enveloped them, a shared understanding that the world had not been kind. Yet in that silence there was comfort, a recognition that neither would face the coming storms alone. For the first time, the cabin felt like more than a refuge, it felt like a home. Jacob began noticing subtle changes in himself. He found himself waking early to gather firewood, not for necessity alone, but because Taya might need warmth. He lingered at the doorway, waiting for her, feeling a quiet anticipation he had forgotten existed. He caught himself glancing at her when she wasn't looking, studying the curve of her jaw, the resilience in her eyes, the way she smiled faintly when the morning sun hit her face. Something deep and unspoken was growing between them, a bond forged from survival, trust, and the delicate intimacy of shared silence. Months passed. Spring thawed the land, revealing green shoots and the promise of renewal. Taya moved with confidence around the cabin and the surrounding ranch, hunting small game, mending fences, and even guiding Jacob through the forest to find herbs and roots. She laughed occasionally, a sound Jacob hadn't heard in years, and each laugh chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, she leaned close and said, "I never thought I'd find a place to rest." Jacob didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed his hand over hers, letting warmth communicate what words could not. It was a silent acknowledgement that she had stayed far longer than one night, and he didn't want her to leave. But the past has a way of finding the present, and Taya's story was far from over. One evening, while Jacob tended to the horses, she returned from the woods with a haunted look in her eyes. "They are coming," she whispered. Jacob froze, understanding immediately. Bandits, raiders, or perhaps people from her past, seeking vengeance or closure. He quickly moved to gather weapons and secure the perimeter. Taya's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the memory of battles she had survived. Jacob realized that their bond had grown in safety, but the world outside still held threats neither could ignore. The danger passed silently, but the incident changed them. Taya opened up more about her past, recounting her journey, the losses, the betrayals, and the moments when hope seemed impossible. Jacob listened, offering no judgment, only presence. He understood that survival wasn't just about enduring storms or wolves or snow. It was about carrying pain and finding someone willing to shoulder it alongside you. By the time she finished her story, the night had deepened, yet neither felt weary. Instead, a sense of mutual respect and understanding cemented their connection more firmly than words ever could. Time continued to unfold. Seasons changed, snow returned, and then melted again. Jacob and Taya grew inseparable. She taught him to track animals more effectively, to listen to the subtle sounds of the forest, to find water in hidden springs. He taught her about the land he called home, the rhythms of ranch life, and the small joys of a solitary existence shared with another. Slowly, the cabin became a sanctuary not just from the elements, but from past pains and loneliness. Together, they created a rhythm, a partnership born not out of convenience, but of trust, resilience, and an unspoken love that neither had dared to name until it became undeniable. The moment that changed everything came quietly one evening. Taya prepared dinner, the aroma of roasted venison filling the cabin, while Jacob cleaned the rifle by the fire. She glanced at him and smiled, a small but genuine expression that carried the weight of months of survival, trust, and companionship. Jacob put down the rifle and took her hands in his. "You were only supposed to stay one night," he said softly, voice almost breaking. Taya laughed, shaking her head. "And yet I never left." Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, both understood that one night had turned into forever. Years later, the cabin stood much the same, weathered but steadfast, surrounded by fields that bore witness to the passage of time. Jacob and Taya lived together, not without struggle, but with a deep bond forged in the harshest winter, the quietest nights, and the most profound solitude. They had found in each other something neither had dared hope for: a companion, a confidant, and ultimately, a home. The storm that had brought Taya to his door had been just the beginning. What followed was life itself, unpredictable, unforgiving, yet immeasurably beautiful. And as the sun set over the mountains, their shadows mingled in a single, unbroken silhouette, proof that love, when it arrives unexpectedly, refuses to leave.